It's the same paradox we've always heard that like in order to receive, you have to give, like, you'll get back more when you give, that kind of thing. And it's like, all right, fine. It's like, no, it doesn't mean self-sacrifice, actually. It means you're going to actually feel better when you're giving from a place of authentically connecting, having something to offer. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Catherine, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing very well. Thank you for being here today. I'm super pumped to have this conversation. I feel like you and I have a lot aligned already. I think this is going to be a lot of fun.
I think so too. I'm having a no half cakes day today
Are you?
because it's
Tell me. I want to hear.
yeah, it's a snow day. It's our third snow day in a row.
Yeah.
I feel like the first two snow days were like the experience of like getting disrupted. And you're like, shit. Like let's cancel things. Let's remove. Barely any
Right.
work's getting done. Then last night, both my husband and I were laughing at each other because we're kind of hoping for a snow day tomorrow to get to just play outside and build the giraffe Lego and,
Nice.
just do it. So I'm like, oh, it's a theme. It's aligned with
Good.
what's going on with your show.
I love that. That's amazing. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask, did that stuff already happen, or is there like a solid plan? Because the last thing I want to do is have this
No,
interrupt.
no. You're part of the plan. We've woven around, and it's like, yes, we've already built our little snowmen and had some building time, and now the kiddos are
Good.
watching a cartoon, and my husband's helping me out, which is very nice. So
Good. Well, that's
yeah.
awesome. I love hearing that. I think more people need that, and obviously that's like the reason why I do this entire show, is to have that exposure to, hey, let's break the chain of thinking that we have to be in this hustle and grind mode all the time, because that's what successful entrepreneurs do. Is we're like, hey, every possible minute we get, we work until right we are successful, but we miss this stuff. And I think that's
It's
such
hard
an
to break
important
that.
perspective.
I feel like that's a patterning that gets woven in early, like the
Yeah.
thinking that productivity is what I'm chasing each day, rather
Yeah.
than presence. Lately, I've been doing a lot of personal internal work on really just like getting into what is rather than like realizing the suffering I'm experiencing in any moment is because my thinking, not because of the actual situation. You know what I mean? Like those
Yeah,
first few
that's
days of
good.
the snow days where it's like, oh, this is so just, and it came after a stretch of like my youngest son having fevers and being home from school the prior 2 days. And it was like, whoa, like normal doesn't exist.
Yes.
But again, like it was just like, okay, this is my thinking that's causing me suffering, not the actual situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, kudos to you, because that's not something that most people are aware enough to realize in that moment. And I think it does take like it takes having the conversation, and more so hearing the conversation, to be like, hey, my decisions or how I'm choosing to live this moment affects my reality.
Yeah.
And again, a
Well,
lot of
I
people
don't think
just
I caught
move
it right
through it.
away. It wasn't until day 3 of snow. So I feel like we're like leaning into like, oh, this is great. Felt like
Yeah,
last night it wasn't going to be a snow day because I actually wanted it to be one. But yeah.
I hear that. So tell me a little bit more about your background, like, because I know entrepreneurship and success and like really enjoying the journey is a big part of it for you.
Mm.
And I know from like the research I've done, it's more about the experience that people gain along the way rather than just the boiled down advice, right? Is that your perspective? It's more like, hey, let's share openly about this is what I went through and the story of it all. Like, tell me your perspective on all that.
Yeah, you're digging into a good slice of it. That's great that you found those things.
Thank you. I appreciate the
Well,
cake pun too.
yeah. See that fun. That's funny. I didn't even mean that. Okay, so what you're finding, I think, goes back to one of my first work experiences, which is lucky that it was one of my first, but it was being the co-founder of the Junto Institute, which was a training program for startup leaders when they're going through that transition of being a startup to now we're a company, and the leadership team needs to shift in that way from doing everything and hustling and wearing all the hats to like beginning to really lead and delegate. And when it's your own company, when you're in a corporate environment or something more structured, you get trained as you get promoted. When it's your own company, those layers are happening without that like market noticing. and the
Right.
intentionality of leveling up as your company levels up, it's hard to step out and do that. So it was a training program for that. And as you highlighted, the ethos was all around sharing experiences and not giving advice. So if you think about advice giving, all the advice any of us would ever give is based on our own experiences. And rather than assume the other person would deduce the same thing with the same information, it's so much more useful to just give them the information you're using to make decisions rather than give them the decision. And then they can make
Yeah.
their own decision. It's more empowering. So, one aspect of the program, and there were four, but one was each company would get paired with five mentors who were seasoned and serial entrepreneurs or executives. And they were selected for that company based on what they said they were
It
needing.
looks like mailman is at the door.
Sorry, my mailman's here.
That's
You don't have
live.
to worry
That's live. And
about
my kids know in the background because it's snow day.
that. But sorry to interrupt. Please continue.
It's okay. So just with the five mentors that each company had, we would run the meetings for them, facilitate the sessions so that they'd be more useful and everyone could just sit down, drop in, and have this deeper conversation about the company and their growth. But the mentors were not allowed to give advice. They had to speak in I statements, not you statements. And we'd actually knock on the table and ask them to rephrase if they were. And I mean, at first it takes some adjusting to, but it becomes a new habit that is much more useful to communicate this way in the world in general, which I, by the way, am not flawless at. I love to give advice, but I have to dial it back. And I really do believe in the power of the shared experience rather than advice giving.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And I honestly didn't really think about it in that perspective until I heard you talking about it, because I think a lot of people want to sort of feel important by giving their advice. Like, hey, I've already gone through this. Let me save you the time and energy by just giving you the answer to the test.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. It definitely does assume that everyone's going to come to the same conclusion based on the story, but the experience is going to be totally different based on, hey, that person is judging it based on their own past experiences. So what we're doing is we're robbing people the opportunity to come to the conclusion that they need to come to based on that experience by just giving them our blanket advice and saying, hey, you go do the same thing I did and you'll get the same results, which I'm sure, as you know, doesn't always happen.
Right. It doesn't. And it's wrong for us to assume that what they're going through is the same thing that we were, because there's differences no matter what. So it may not be the same conclusion that's the right answer, but getting more information is always useful.
Yeah. I love that. So that was like your early phase, if you will, right? Where
This
did you
started
go
when I
from
was
there?
24 and lasted until almost 30. And then right around there, my husband and I decided to move out to the Pacific Northwest where we are now. And I did some consulting with companies and then also, truthfully, had several years off as it was perfectly aligned. We moved into a house on Bainbridge Island and that very week found out we were pregnant. And so it was like this perfect nesting phase. And when my first kiddo was 8 months old, the pandemic hit. And I live on this beautiful island. And so it was kind of like this easy moment of like, peace. World, I am not going to try to figure this out with you on Zoom. And I'm just going to fade off into the sunset. And honestly, I really do believe in, oh gosh, I think like Tim Ferriss calls it mini retirements. But
Yep.
I think there's natural cycles in nature, and we're crazy for not realizing we are also part of nature. Like we are animals and are wired with the same cyclical nature. I think it's really healthy to have moments of outer productivity and then moments of inward kind of development and rest and
Right.
mining different things. So for me, that's actually what happened during the almost 6 years I was off. But then there were also still for several of those years projects that I was involved in and little collaborations. Total transparency, my ego for a long time wasn't ready to totally release all titles and work. And then after the birth of my second child, I was like, I need to do this, like for the sake of getting this experience and like totally detaching and seeing what happens, kind of almost letting the internal
Right.
freak out happen and go to the ground and then come back up something different rather than always needing, this is what I'm doing to feel more worthy, you know? So
Yeah.
it was a really healing experience to be in touch with nature and human skin and just kind of pull into myself rather than feel like I had to, I don't know, continue to prove.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah, that's a bit. There's other things, but I'll stop there for now.
Do you think a lot of that comes from the lack of understanding authentically who you are? Not saying you now, but I'm saying like in that phase, and it makes me think a lot about the founder. A lot of their identity becomes the business. So if they are not working on the business or the business is not successful, then they just cease to exist. I'm
Mm,
thinking a lot of people who can separate that and authentically know who they are able to, you know, take that mini retirement and go work on themselves because they are not their business.
yeah. I think like just like in nature, we're constantly in cycles of many deaths and rebirths. And I think when you are like the founder and the company is a reflection, it's like it's being driven and created off the energy of your own, like this is like esoteric language, but like inner spirit. Like it is you expressed in the world. It's like your energy going out there making things happen. So, I mean, of course, the identities are going to be intertwined. I think that's pretty natural, and I wouldn't fault anyone for it. I don't think it's a negative. And then I think that the cycle continues, and there's going to be a natural point where that person needs to detach from it for they themselves to become something more, and who they are and the entity they created become different, and that's
Right.
okay, you know? So I think that's a natural cycle, and then that's the inward. And also I know a lot of, I mean, it's pretty out there that people go through sometimes depressions after selling their companies and retiring and that kind of thing because they're breaking away from that stamp of worth. But it,
Mm.
yeah, I believe that's a natural process.
So do you think it's something that people can do maybe more frequently in mini spurts so that it doesn't become too ingrained? Right. So almost like if you're growing a plant in the ground, you dig it up every few months so the roots don't go too deep. It might
Yeah,
not be a it's a logical analogy, but it's what I came up with.
I think yes, and I think it's not something we need to engineer, but it's about listening to our lives, and
Mm.
it's catching those hints as to where we are, like what would you put yourself in, winter, summer, spring, or fall right now, you know? And
Yeah.
in your own natural cycle. And I have a feeling if we really sat with it, each of us could identify some season we feel like we're in as a self. And I don't think it, sometimes I think our culture has it programmed in our heads that we need to prove that we're in perpetual summer. And
Mm.
that's the problem, is like trying to force more summer when that's just not what's happening. And there's a deeper call to go inward and shed some things and move on from some things. And none of that is a negative thing, but it doesn't feel good or glamorous or like something we want to post about. But the best thing is probably if we go along with that process, later on, whatever we learn from it is going to be part of the next thing we create. So
Yeah.
it's counterintuitive to resist it too much.
It really makes me think of, this might also be a weird story, but I'll go with it.
Hmm.
Is, and I'm not a scientist, so the actual science might be off on this, but this is just what I understand. Trees in the fall, when their leaves change color to the beautiful orange and the yellow and the red, that's their natural color. But
Hmm.
during the summer months, they are all green because they're producing extra chlorophyll to consume extra sunlight. But when they approach fall and the sunlight starts to, be less and less, that's when their natural colors come out and they become essentially more outwardly visible who they authentically are. And I'm
Interesting.
just starting to think about this here in relation to what you're saying about people who are trying to live in that perpetual summer. They never get to lose their leaves, right? They never get to experience that authentic color. And yeah, I don't know if that made a ton of sense, but the story
No,
really just made me think about the authenticity part about trying to live in summer all year long and how it's just not really, it wouldn't vibe well.
no, I don't think it's healthy. But I think you're right, because if I think about maybe the falls or winters I've personally had, it's like the paring back feeling that does get you in touch with something more solid inside.
Yeah.
I think you find new ground or more ground.
Mm. Sort of gives you that home base to kind of get back to your real, raw, authentic self. To then
Yeah.
you're also excited about the spring, right? Because
Yeah.
if it was just summer all year long, you wouldn't be excited for that warmer weather, the opportunity. And I feel like burnout and uninspired people would be more common.
Yeah. And I think it is more common than we know, burnout and uninspired people. And
Yeah.
I think we're kind of in this era where we're all clamoring for more self directed lives. And there's a big shift happening, kind of obviously, and then also underneath the surface. Because I don't
Yeah.
think a lot of we're not all posting about, hey, I'm headed into winter over here,
Yeah. I mean, it's not as glorious, right?
No, it's
Well,
not.
actually, I shouldn't say that because I think it is as glorious. Socially, it's not accepted as glorious.
It doesn't
Like,
look glamorous. Like if we were
yeah.
having this conversation when I was like, pulling back and kind of like had no headline and stuff, I different kind of me showing up because I'm questioning myself. The self-worth thing, it feels real shaky. Like a lot of things are uprooted. I don't have new solid ground I've found yet. There's more questions than answers.
Yeah. How does faith play a part in that? Maybe not necessarily so much in the full sense of like religion,
Mm,
but even as far as when you're entering a season of winter, faith that spring is going to come next.
yeah. My word for the year, which kind of sums up most of the priorities or intentions, is trust. And so I'm like digging into something aligned to that feeling of faith in myself. It's more like realizing my human mind is actually not the most brilliant thing going on here, you know?
Hmm.
Like like life itself, look at it. Like look at nature, like doing its thing, changing over year after year. It's very effective and efficient. Like literally like the rabbit's poop is putting seeds in a new place that seeds needs to be, like
Right.
things are happening without us having to do it. And my life is actually the same way. Most of our lives, I mean, our lives are the same way, where the things happen, and then, well, the good things and the bad things kind of a lot of them happen without us making them so. And even the bad things, we look back and we're like, oh, this changed that and that, and now I'm this kind of person in a different place, and this is for the better. I don't know. So the trust and like the stop the controlling thing, Catherine, because it's actually not doing anything but causing more suffering, you know?
Yeah. Which makes sense. I think it relates back to like what you talked about at the onset of this conversation of how your choices of interpreting reality are affecting that reality.
Mm-hmm.
Like just because it snowed doesn't mean it's going to be a good day or a bad day. It's snow. How you choose to react to the snow outside, that decision's up to you. It's not changing a reality. It's just a thing.
Right. And it's not even the snow, it's like the disrupted schedule
Of
and feeling
course.
at the mercy of so many forces and that the things are out of my control. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
something I'm still like leaning into, and parts of me have not learned.
Well, I think it's a really good point to also realize that like your entire life, and this might sound overly dramatic, but your entire
Hmm.
life is really kind of out of your control. Like you can't really control. You didn't control when you were born. You didn't control what you look like. Like all that stuff was randomly chosen for you or specifically chosen for you. And then hey, now you're here. And yeah, you can make some choices in how you interpret it, but you also don't know your end date. You don't know like everyone else you interact with. These are
Right.
things we can't try and control them all. We'd go crazy in a heartbeat. We'd wind up, cowering in fear under our desk in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
But I think if you just like look at the beauty of all of it and you release control and have that trust and have that faith, you're able to just show up and appreciate it for what it is. And
Yeah.
I think that gives you such a superpower to just show up raw and be like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm just going to make the best of whatever the situation is and roll with it.
That's right. And I do think that there's such a thing as aligned action when we're like, oh my
Mm.
God, you're just like, it's pouring out of you to do whatever it is you're going to do. Like you're finding something new online, that you're putting things together for your business. And, I think that that's a real thing. There's a difference between forcing and going with the flow of what's going on in your life. And I do think, yeah, sometimes it means we have to put things on a task list and check those off. And, it's still, the world we live in to a degree, but living more like this where, yeah, it's like listening to your life more often
Yeah.
and being in the flow with it.
So I think the big shift there is going with the ebbs and flows. Because I
Mm-hmm.
think like the other mindset is, hey, I'm going to hustle and grind for the next 40 years, take no days off, no vacations, no nothing, just consistently work on the business because that's what you're supposed to do to be successful, and ignoring the ebbs and flows. Or you can just lean into them and understand, hey, sometimes you're going to have that period where you just need to chill out and do a Lego. Or
Yeah.
sometimes you're going to have the day where you got that action flowing where you can do 18 hours of work straight and it feels like 8 minutes.
Right. Exactly. Like how work actually gets done. It's the same way in
Right.
nature, like in these like bursts, It's not always
Mhm.
like the same output every day, not summer every day, and it's important also to have those weird moments of creativity that you might have when you're pulling back and sitting there and doing like a Lego set with your son
Yeah.
and I'm like, then something pops into my mind about the business. I'm like, oh shoot, that's a great idea. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
But it's real though. I mean, it's for me personally, a lot of times on a vacation or on a
Hmm.
walk or in the shower, like places that you're not intentionally thinking about business is when you have those breakthrough ideas because you're allowing your mind to just relax. You're not trying to force yourself to be, immediately creative and resolve it on the spot, but you kind of just let your subconscious process that thought and it comes. And I feel
Yeah.
like that's such a good lesson there that, what I'm hearing you say is for us to lean into the seasons and not try to control it too much.
Right. And I think we're so much more than the thinking mind. That's what it is, too. Like that's the thing to trust. Like whatever our self actually is so much more than the different aspects and personalities that we think define us. And
Right.
relying only on the thinking mind to get things done. Yeah, it is the moments of inspiration. And like when you're doing something different, like the shower or working out or, on the plane with your family on the way to vacation, whatever it is, like big insights happen in moments where you, again, are not forced.
Right. So, how did this all come about for you? Like, what was the inspiration for you to pursue this as your path?
Oh, this is not necessarily my path as much as
Oh, well,
it
all
is
right.
my life. Like, yeah, it's like life being lived through me, I guess. But my current work did on theme kind of drop out of the sky because I was trying to do something else. And then the opportunity to do my current work came about, which is the Skinny platform. I'm a partner through the Skinny platform, and it's an alternative to ghostwriting for entrepreneurs who want to write their books. And it's I'll show you an example. They are shorter books. So it's the idea of liberating both the reader and the author not to have to read something that's 250 pages long or feel like you have to write that in order for your story to feel valuable and worthwhile. And we're coming into an age where we need the raw, real human stories, the shared experiences.
Yes.
And we've got perfect information at our fingertips now with AI. So the most unique and valuable thing about you are your stories, like your lived experiences and how you gained your wisdom. The information that's paired with your experiences and how you saw them, and now how you move in the world because of it. I mean, AI is not going to come up with that. I
Right.
mean, it might come up with a process that's aligned, but not with you on it.
Right. And it's going to lack the authenticity of your voice, really.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, if I'm hearing you correctly, one of the things you're doing here is removing the barrier to entry for people to be able to share their story, right?
Yes.
By just making it simple.
Yes, and especially for the visionaries who are not probably the natural sit down at my computer and write my story kind of person,
Yeah.
which I'm finding is very rare actually. And I'm beginning to like have this theory that I don't think books should be born alone because they're stories, and to make a story, you actually have to have it heard. And it's just become so much more when I don't know, it's being done this way. What we actually do is a call where we kind of map out the story and the content and the emotion and things like that. But then the book is born through a 3 to 4 hour interview. And I'm lucky that my role is to get to be the interviewer. So once again, I'm like pulling in and hearing these amazing shared experiences from entrepreneurs.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been really fun. And so I'm just really listening and reflecting back to them and hearing it, and it's all getting transcribed, listened to by AI, and then that's transcribed. And the nice thing is with both AI, but mostly human editors and writers, we just shift the wording from how you speak to how you read.
Right.
And right there is the first rough draft. And then from there, we
Mm.
work with the author to shake it into the, the full book. But it's all in their voice, and it's not something that someone else has to listen to and then try and capture their voice. It's their voice and the way they
I love
speak
that.
and the way they use, the words they use. So it's been really fun, very gratifying. And I found that it's pretty natural to, I feel like stories expand when they're being heard rather than think about like trying to get your story out alone and wondering and like the dialogue that might be in your head, like,
Right.
does this make sense? Is someone going to judge this? Instead, like having it be a natural human moment where someone's really receiving the story and with you in it, like the emotion and the story and the confidence all expands. So it's
Mm.
been really fun. We're still learning a lot, but I'm calling it story listening, which I think you do here with podcasting. But more happens when you're present and listening, a story expands.
Yeah. Do you, I don't want to get too into the weeds unless you want to, but
Yeah.
do you offer the audio and or video version of their story along with the book?
Yes. So when the book launches, we also publish the long form, the sit down interview. Yeah.
Wow.
And then also the publishing, because we are a plugin through Amazon or, have that all wrapped together. So they also have the audiobook that they can release along with the, Kindle and hard copy.
Yeah,
So
that's awesome. I'm jealous of you for that because that sounds like such a fun thing to sit down and do with people. Because I find so much, you just learn so much about other people by hearing these stories. Much to
Mhm.
your point, like these stories need to be shared, but also how cool it is that each person you walk past has that story in waiting to be shared.
I
Like that's the
know.
thing that we don't consider when you walk past 30 people on the street is they all have 30 really unique lives and 30 stories, which, hey, they may not be New York Times bestsellers, but that does not mean they are not valuable. And
Right.
I feel like we look past that way too easily.
You know what's funny is when the books are shorter, people read them more easily. And we're actually like doing the Amazon bestseller thing, which is easier than New York Times bestseller, fine. But like they're all hitting Amazon bestsellers so far. I mean, we're still a startup and it's been new, but I think it's easier to read and review when they're not going to take like 2 months to read
Yeah.
with each of your evenings, like chipping away a little bit. So they're meant to be read in one sitting. And
Mm.
I think it's easier to support and internalize when it's that way.
I love that. I'm going to make a public commitment here because why not? But let's
Mhm.
do the No Have Cake story.
Let's
Let's do
do
it
it.
together. If you'd love to, I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, well, and I'll give you
Yeah.
the full skinny pitch either right on this or like after. But part of the thing that we have a mission on is democratizing writing your book. And we call it a book journey. And what's wrapped into it is like the mapping, the writing, which is the long interview, the editing process. And then also once the book's ready for launch, it's the promotion, like 30 days
Right.
before, 60 days after launch. And so really those are like three major mountains to climb with getting your book out there in the traditional sense is the writing of it, the editing, and then the publishing promotion. Well, that's actually four. But we're wrapping all of that together in one experience. And it's awesome with AI that it's been made easier to actually get the writing done.
Right.
And I don't know, it's turned into a fraction of the cost, fraction of the time kind of thing. And it's not that we're cutting any serious corners. It's interesting. It's almost like how back in the day, going to a university was only for academics and only for the elite and the very few. And I feel like up till recently, it's been that way with book writing. And
Yeah.
now why not? Why shouldn't every person get a chance to write their story if they wanted to?
Yeah. I mean, you're right. I think, at least for most of my childhood, the idea of writing a book was it's got to be this 300-400 page monster that has to be jam packed full of stuff. You have to go find a publishing company who's going to pay you in advance to write your story, and you have to be interesting enough for them to even want to hear you.
Mm-hmm.
But like the question I always ask is, what is a book? How do you define a book? How do you define a podcast? Like, if you stop making it this big thing and just say, hey, it's your story in words on paper, it's very approachable. And I feel like, again, there's so many people who have so much to share, but aren't. So I am a huge advocate, obviously without even using your product, but just the idea of people sharing their stories,
That's right.
I think is tremendously valuable, not just for the person sharing it to get that off their chest and to share it with the world, but the people to receive. like you said, the experiences that we all have, they mean so much, not just to us, but the other people who can hear them and then put their own filter, their own perspective on it and hear the word that they need to. But it's useless if we don't share it.
That's right. And the fun thing too is this is only going to become more and more important as we go through the next decade plus, because the value of information is declining because it's becoming so easy to get any level of perfect information, with quick type into ChatGPT or whatever we're using. And so the value of the non-perfect is going to increase. Like things like community, human stories, connection, like that. AI can't help you with that. So that's becoming more and more rare, valuable, and important.
Yeah.
Just watch. I mean, it's pretty. I believe that in the next decade, everybody's going to want to write a book because they're going to realize, like, oh, this is actually my asset, the one that I can control to some degree.
Yeah. And I think, like you said too, it really is an interesting phenomenon as AI becomes more prevalent and it starts to be more capable of doing stuff. Like it can help you transcribe and edit pretty quickly, but it cannot live your life for you and create the experiences for you, put them through your filter and lens, right? In 8 billion times, 8 billion people, it's just not going to happen, right? And I think putting the power back in the person's hands to really embolden them to share their story and give them value is amazing. I know there's a lot of people who feel like AI is this thing that's going to replace me. It's going to take all the opportunity away from you. But I think if you instead look at how to harness it to really give yourself back even more power and make yourself more valuable, again, that's a choice.
Yeah.
Like we live in a time where we're not going to get rid of AI. It's a thing. It's here. Okay. We are at the invention of the car. It's here. Okay. So horses, right? Are they less valuable now or are we using them differently? Like for us, hey, am I less valuable or am I more valuable because I'm going to make a choice for, hey, I can lean in. You can learn how to use AI and leverage it in your life, automate some stuff, get rid of your emails so you can have more time to hang out and play Legos, or you can use it to make yourself more publicly available. I think that's, again, a choice that people can make.
Well, I think it's just becoming what's valuable is shifting. It scares people because they've been in the one mode. But instead of what you do and you're doing being what's of value, it's who you are and your being that is more valuable. And so it's just interesting because it's like, I think at first when we think, oh, my doing is getting taken away, then what am I? But we get to sit with that question, as uncomfortable as it could be, and realize it's going to be your essence that is valuable. And to get to not work, but dwell in that more is actually going to be wonderful, I think. It also can be hard, but it's an invitation to something more authentically you.
Yeah. I mean, the raw idea excites me because for there to be more value on individual people's authenticity and their story is awesome. But at the same time, I get why it's going to be such a hurdle because for a lot of people, they don't know who they are. So it's really an uncomfortable process if you've been operating as my identity is my business or my identity is my kids or my identity is whatever for X amount of years. And now you need to suddenly figure out who you are. It's uncomfortable. And a lot of people avoid that. So I think there's going to be a really painful shift, right? As people start to walk that out and figure out I have no idea who I am. I'm now 30, 40, 50 years old and I'm starting from scratch. Right? I have to erase what I thought I was and figure out who I am at the same time. My job is changing. All this stuff is going on is scary.
Yeah.
And I think if there's not people like us who are out there having the conversation, willing to kind of, shoulder up and say, hey, take my hand, let's go. We'll do this together. It gets scarier. But, honor to you for being a person willing to do that, literally spending your life listening to other people and giving them a platform is crazy honorable. So huge honor to you for doing that because it's really more important than I think you'll ever get credit for.
No, I appreciate that. It's really fun. It's just similar to what you get to do with this podcast. Listening to people is an honor. And it's funny because through listening, you almost have more to speak about. So it's one of those things where it's just like the inverse is how you get what you thought you wanted. Like I think when I was little, I was like, oh, I really want to speak. And I was like, how's that ever going to happen? And it's really funny. I'm like sitting here the other day, I'm like, it's happening because I'm listening. Like you've got more to talk about.
Yeah.
How funny is that?
Wow, that's a mic drop quote if I've ever heard one.
Yeah,
This
thanks.
this really is true. Like in order for us to be able to speak, we have to listen. I feel like so many people want to just Amazon Prime the speaking part and forget about the listening.
We want to do
Right?
that to everything, but that's
Yeah.
when we think we're only our doing parts and not our being parts.
Mm.
To receive, you have to give, like, you'll get back more when you give, that kind of thing. And it's like, all right, fine. It's like, no, it doesn't mean self-sacrifice. Actually, it means you're going to actually feel better when you're giving from a place of authentically
Yeah.
connecting, having something to offer, being excited to share. Like when you're giving out of spiteful, feeling totally depleted, that's never good. But yeah, it's the same paradox of like you get what you give, it comes back to you, kind of thing.
Yeah. No, that's so good. Well, I am overjoyed with this conversation, and now like every part of it has been phenomenal. So I want to thank you
Thank you.
tremendously for that, especially for giving time in your snow day away from
Ah,
Legos and hopefully hot chocolate, because hot chocolate on a snow day is clutch.
well, I had
Extra
a multiple
marshmallows.
coffee day. That's been good. Yeah.
But as we're kind of ending up here, I wanted to ask you if you had one bit of advice to give to someone to have them level up their day.
Ha.
What might that be?
Well, we started this conversation talking about how, advice is maybe not what we can be doing that's most
Fair.
valuable. But I get the essence of this is to kind of what would you leave folks with? Contemplate your being, your essence isn't always your form. Like that's essence over form is something I'm always like curious about in my life. It's really funny how when I'm seeking things and I'm like, oh, this exact place or this exact kind of job is what I want, it's always more about the feeling. So back into the like, what would it feel like to have those things? And then I realized, oh my God, that's actually what showed up in a totally different package. I feel like that's like
Mhm.
a constant in life. And kind of alongside that, just the idea of beginning to realize, what do you do? That's, wonderful, the things you create in the world. But then behind that, who do you be? Begin to explore yourself and not just the person who produces certain things and identity being a part of that only, but also that, the essence behind it. That is you. That's the energy that emanates all the things you create.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you again. Tremendous honor, and I mean it for real. The
Thanks.
work that you do in empowering other people to share their stories is admirable. So
Well,
thank you
I've
for doing
tipped my hat to you as well. This is a cool podcast to be a part of and an amazing story that started it. So,
it. Thank you.
yeah, people do need to continue to hear that and tap into that energy of like what matters in life.
Yeah, it's an important question that we don't ask because it's uncomfortable usually. But
Yeah.
man, let me tell you, it's one of the best things to ever go through.
Yeah, but I feel like that patterning's breaking. We're in a good, potentially great place in the world where we're like, that question's being forced in a deeper
Yeah,
way. Yeah.
yeah, I'm excited for it. I'm here for it.
Yeah, I bet you are.
I
Awesome.
love it.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.